She had just walked away to give him space. She didn't know those would be the last words she would ever hear him say. Before the tabloids, before the tragedy, before history swallowed him whole, there was a woman who loved Elvis Presley, not as a king, but as a man who was slowly coming apart at the seams. And in his final hours, he made sure she knew what she had meant to him. Linda Thompson was 22 years old when she walked into Elvis Presley's world in 1972, as she never quite walked back out. A Tennessee beauty queen with a quick wit and a warm laugh. She was introduced to Elvis at a private movie screening at the Memphian Theater, a place he rented after midnight so he could watch films without the circus of fans and cameras. He was 37. Priscilla had just left. And Elvis, beneath all the rhinestones and the myth, was achingly, desperately lonely from the very first night. Linda didn't treat him like the king of rock and roll. She treated him like a person. She teased him, argued with him, laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny, and pushed back when they were. To a man who had spent 20 years surrounded by yes-men who agreed with everything he said, her honesty was intoxicating. Elvis invited her back the next night, and the night after that. Within weeks, she had moved into Graceland for 4 years. Linda Thompson was the woman behind the curtain, the one who held his hand through the weight gain, the pill dependency, the paranoia, and the rages that no one outside those walls ever witnessed. She was his nurse, his confidant, his sparring partner, and his anchor to something resembling a normal life. She cooked for him. She read the Bible to him when he couldn't sleep. She sat beside him in emergency rooms, more times than anyone should ever have to count. But loving Elvis Presley came at a cost that compounded daily. The man she adored was slowly disappearing beneath the chemicals that were meant to keep him functional, and often did the opposite. There were nights she stayed awake until dawn, just to listen to him breathe, terrified that the rhythm would stop. There were days he was radiant, funny, generous beyond reason, and days he was a ghost haunting his own home. Linda never stopped loving him through any of it. But by 1976, she was beginning to understand that she could not save him from himself. I loved him so profoundly that I would have done anything for him. But there was a part of Elvis that no one could reach, not even me. Linda Thompson. The phone calls from Graceland to the hospital had become frighteningly routine by 1975. Elvis would mix his prescriptions, the uppers to wake him, the downers to sleep, the painkillers for his back. The pills his doctor prescribed without question, because the man asking was Elvis Presley, and no one said no to Elvis Presley. The cocktails were unpredictable, and sometimes they turned dangerous in the middle of the night. There was one particular evening that Linda has spoken about in interviews, her voice still carrying the tremor of it decades later, when she woke to the sound of silence where there should have been breathing. She reached for him in the dark and found him unresponsive. She screamed. She shook him. She called out to the security staff and stood there barefoot on the marble floor, watching men she barely knew try to bring the man she loved back to consciousness. He came back. He always came back. That time, what struck Linda afterward was not the relief, but the exhaustion beneath the relief. She remembers sitting in the bathroom afterward, shaking, thinking, I cannot keep doing this. Not because she didn't love him. She loved him fiercely and without condition. But because she was watching a man she adored make choices, night after night, that she was powerless to undo. She was 25 years old. She had spent the last 3 years sleeping with one eye open. Elvis, for his part, was not unaware of what he was putting her through. In his clearer moments, he was achingly apologetic. He would bring her gifts, jewelry, cars, anything money could buy, as if the weight of a diamond could balance out a sleepless night. Linda never wanted the gifts. She wanted him to want to get better. And that, as it turned out, was the one thing he could never quite give her. He would look at me sometimes with these eyes that were so sorry, so full of shame. And I would tell him, just live. That's all I need from you. Linda Thompson, in a 2012 interview. By late 1976, Linda Thompson made one of the hardest decisions of her life. She left Graceland. She has been careful, always, to say this was not an abandonment. She did not stop loving Elvis. She did not stop worrying about him. She did not walk out because she was tired of him. She walked out because she knew, in some quiet, devastating corner of her heart, that staying was destroying her and not saving him. There is a difference between devotion and martyrdom, and Linda Thompson was wise enough, barely, to know where that line was. The separation was not clean or dramatic. It was the kind of ending that happens in slow motion, where two people gradually occupy less and less of each other's present, while still carrying enormous weight from their shared past. Elvis had begun spending time with Ginger Alden, a younger woman who had entered his orbit as Linda was pulling back. There was no explosion, no single confrontation. There was just a slow and painful uncoupling between two people who had once been each other's whole world. Linda has said publicly that she does not regret leaving. She regrets what made leaving necessary. She regrets the system that kept Elvis sick, the handlers who protected the myth at the expense of the man, the doctors who wrote the prescriptions without asking hard questions, the industry that needed the performer healthy enough to perform and never asked what that performance was costing him. She left a person she loved to survive. She has had to live with that ever since. What she could not have known, what no one around Elvis could have known, because they refused to see it clearly, was how little time remained. In the months after Linda left, Elvis's health deteriorated more rapidly than ever before. The performances became erratic. The weight continued to climb. The medication consumption reached levels that, had anyone been counting with real attention, should have terrified the people closest to him. But Elvis Presley had spent 30 years being the exception to every rule, and the people around him had long since stopped applying ordinary logic to him. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. I left because love alone wasn't enough to do what he needed done, and I wasn't strong enough to watch anymore. Linda Thompson. In early August of 1977, Linda Thompson received a phone call from Elvis. It was not unusual for him to call. They had remained in contact. The way two people do when the bond between them doesn't dissolve just because the relationship ends. He told her he missed her. He told her she had been, in many ways, the best thing that had ever happened to him. He told her that he knew he hadn't made it easy, and that she deserved more than he had been able to give. It was the kind of call that people make, sometimes, when something inside them is quietly trying to say goodbye. On the morning of August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of Graceland. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrhythmia, likely exacerbated by chronic prescription drug use. He was gone before help could reach him. Ginger Alden was in the house. Linda was not. She heard the news the way the rest of the world did, through a phone call that changed everything. The words he had said to her in that final phone call became something she turned over, and over in the years that followed. Not just the words themselves, but the tone, the particular register of a man who was, perhaps unconsciously, settling his accounts. He had told her she was irreplaceable. He had thanked her for the years. And then he had said something that she has shared in interviews only sparingly, because some things are too private to reduce to a headline, that no matter what happened, she should know that she had made him feel less alone in a life that had made loneliness into an art form. Decades later, Linda Thompson built a life of extraordinary fullness. She became a songwriter of considerable talent, co-writing hits that charted across genres. She married, had children, and found love again in ways she hadn't thought possible after Graceland. But she has never pretended that Elvis Presley was simply a chapter she turned the page on. He is woven into her caution and her courage, into her understanding of what it means to love someone you cannot fix, into the specific way she listens when people talk about grief. She carries him, not as a wound, but as a weight that became, over time, something closer to wisdom. He didn't just change my life. He educated my heart. I wouldn't be who I am without having loved him and lost him. Linda Thompson, 2017. Elvis Presley has been gone for nearly 50 years. The legend has grown so large that the man inside it is sometimes hard to see. The man who was afraid of being alone, who called people in the middle of the night just to hear a familiar voice, who had a gift for making whoever sat across from him feel like the most important person in the world. Linda Thompson knew that man. She nursed him, loved him, mourned him long before he died, and mourned him again when he did. And she carries his last words with her, not as a relic, but as a reminder that behind every myth there is a person who just wanted to be known. Did this story move you? Share it with someone who loves music, history, or has ever had to love someone they couldn't save. And drop a comment. Which part hit you hardest?